I came to New Haven to go to law school to study issues of civil rights and social justice. And the more you dig into those issues, the more they keep coming back. Almost every form of inequality we were seeing was downstream of unequal investments we were making in kids, specifically in low income, kids of color, primarily in our urban communities. You didn't have to look very far to see that on display in New Haven. And so I actually started, I enrolled in the teacher prep program and started teaching in one of New Haven's middle schools, and had on many respects a great experience student teaching, but also a heartbreaking one in that the 7th and 8th graders I worked with were reading on average 3 years below grade level. And while the only thing they thought I was remotely qualified to teach was history and social studies, it's very clear that the bigger gaps, the ones that would really make a huge difference in their life outcomes, was the reading and writing deficits they were facing. And so in my very unskilled way, I put a lot of effort into trying to address that issue, and frankly didn't make a lot of progress and found it very challenging as a beginning teacher, and went to my mentor teacher and said, you know, I was teaching Johnny Tremaine at the time, and said, the kids are really struggling to read this book. How do I help them to improve their reading skills? And she said, oh, just show them the movie. And my heart sank in that moment. And I knew that what I was doing was ineffective, and it was in fact part of a broader system that at the moment wasn't working for too many kids. And that sent me on a journey to try to figure out, well, what is working? And fortunately at the time, in the early stage of the charter movement, I could go to a handful of examples about what was working. So I was in New Haven studying these issues of education and inequity, and thought I would go to a New Haven Board of Ed meeting and see what was happening. And fortunately, I picked the one where they were rolling out the results and they were sharing the test scores from the previous year. And the superintendent presented, and they were celebrating incremental gains, plus 1% in reading, plus 2% in math. And however, the underlying reality was that 75 to 80% of the kids were still not proficient at grade level. And they felt like these incremental celebrations were emphasizing the wrong point. After that, an expert from no less than Yale University stood up and said, well, the school system is doing about as well as it can, because as we all know, the straightest line you'll ever see is between the socioeconomic status of the parents and the educational outcomes of the kids. And this is really fundamentally about issues of poverty and violence and single-family homes and everything else that's happening in our urban communities. So you had the challenge of results, and that was tough. Then you had this explain it away presentation from the experts. The worst part of the meeting was actually when it came time for public comment. And there was no public comment. And it was at that moment, sitting there, that I just realized, of course, issues of poverty are incredibly complex. And of course, they make high educational outcomes more challenging. And yet, to have our community learn that 75% of students did not have the basic skills they needed to be successful, and to have the conversation stop there, that's when we decided we needed to do something to change the conversation, to admit all of the challenges that exist, but to say a different reality has to be possible, and we want to be part of the solution. So when we realized there was a huge challenge, we just went out to find what worked. And that journey took us to the handful of schools that you could find in the late 90s that were just starting to flourish, whether they were the first public charter schools. I will never forget my visit to Kip Bronx when I first met Dave Levin, and I was blown away by what those young people were doing and how committed they were to their educational journey, and how committed the teachers were, and how good the instruction was, and the investment of everybody involved. We went out to California and saw accelerated schools, went all the way to Calgary, Canada. Actually spent a significant amount of time at Calgary Academy, which demographically could not look more different than the student population we were about to serve in New Haven, Connecticut. And yet, what they shared in common, unfortunately, is the students were years below grade level. That was a school that focused on special education students. And kids who were just underperforming their potential. And here we had kids who were underperforming their potential. We learned a tremendous amount of them from them about how to teach reading well, how to help kids organize their stuff. So we took a tremendous amount from KIPP. I remember my first visit to Morning Circle at North Star, and it just gave you a sense that it was possible. And we pretty unapologetically cobbled together best practices we learned from elsewhere. And I think one of the wonderful things about this movement is we all have our eyes open and we're looking around constantly. We try to do so without ego. And when there's something effective that's really making a difference for kids, we unapologetically steal it.